I have to say that the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago stand in solidarity with the government and people of Ukraine. Our country remains grounded in the respect for the sovereignty and the sovereign equality of all states, and for the respect and adherence for international law and to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Earlier today, I would have had sight, and if I can just find it, of a communique which came out of the 33rd Intersessional Meeting of CARICOM Heads of Government. And this was issued today by heads on the war and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. I'm sure you would have access to the full statement, but perhaps I can just recite that the position of CARICOM, again, is that the CARICOM body reaffirms the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and call for respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And as I said before, that remains the position of Trinidad and Tobago, which we have been advocating from day one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Gopi Skoon. I am here today on the instructions of the Cabinet to deal with two matters. The first matter is with respect to TSTT, and then, of course, the second matter is to deal with the tragic accident that took place with LMCS divers at Paria's facilities last week, Friday, the 25th of February. So let me start by just addressing the TSTT issue. As the population should be aware, we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, actually have the majority ownership in TSTT. There's a majority ownership by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and there's a minority ownership of 49% by Cable and Wireless in TSTT. One of the discussions that came up today at Cabinet was with respect to TSTT, and a decision was taken by the Cabinet to appoint a sub-Cabinet committee to take a look at TSTT's current position, what status are they in now. Secondly, to take a look at, are they fit for purpose in an ever-changing world that is a revolution that's taking place in front of our eyes in the whole telecommunications industry. And thirdly, on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, for us to come back with recommendations to the Cabinet as to what we believe TSTT should be done with TSTT. And part of that would, of course, include a valuation of the current value of TSTT. This sub-Cabinet committee would be chaired by the Minister of Planning and Development, the Honorable Camille Robinson Regis. It will include the Minister of Public Utilities, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Colum Imbert, the Minister of Digital Transformation, the Honorable Hassel Bacchus, and myself out of the Office of the Prime Minister. So that committee that comprises the five of us have been tasked with Cabinet, as I said, at taking a look at TSTT, what state is it in now, looking at the whole revolution that has taken place and whether it still remains fit for purpose, and then looking at what recommendations we can make to Cabinet, and that would also include a value, a current market value of TSTT. The second matter is one that I addressed earlier this week as the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, and a matter that has really grasped our whole nation during the course of almost the whole week, starting with Friday of last week, as I say, when 5 divers employed with LMCS had an accident that turned out to be a tragic accident for 4 of the divers, Mr. Kazim Ali, Mr. Yusuf Henry, Mr. Faizul Kurban, and Mr. Rishi Nagasa. And I start by taking the liberty of expressing my sincere condolences on behalf of all of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular on behalf of the government, to the families, friends, colleagues, and everyone who was affected by the tragic loss of these 4 gentlemen, nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. As you are aware, after the tragic accident, there were a number of operations that finally resulted in the retrieving of the final body, that of Mr. Rishi Nagasa, last night, just after 12:30 a.m. this morning. I got the call at exactly 12:39 this morning from Paria to inform me that the final diver's body had been retrieved. And I think we've all breathed a sense of and a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the bodies were retrieved without any serious decomposition, and then more particularly one of the concerns that we had in carrying out these operations, that they would be dismembered bodies and that they would not come out in their full form. So again, I take the opportunity to really wish God's grace on the families. May He give them strength. The nation, all of us sensible, right-thinking citizens are behind you. We've been praying, first of all, for the men and their safety, and then after, at a certain stage, for the retrieval of their bodies. And as I had promised, on Monday, one of the things that the government had decided was at the end of this, there would be an independent investigation carried out. The Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries is the regulator of this industry in law. So we're using that as a legal umbrella for the carrying out of an investigation into the circumstances leading up to this unfortunate accident that then turned into tragic circumstances. So leading up, the accident itself, and what happened thereafter, to put it simply. I had promised on behalf of the government that there would be an independent investigation carried out by independent professionals. Of course, having said that, I then listened, we the government listened to hear what were some of the comments that would have come out, the useful, positive, and constructive comments that came out thereafter, because we had to formulate this committee. Well, I'm happy to say that we have taken a decision this afternoon on the recommendation of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for a 5-panel committee to be composed, and that committee would do a report, do an investigation, and report back to me as the regulator within a 45-day period. The committee comprises as follows. The chairman will be Mr. Shiv Sharma, an attorney at law of about 18 years in practice. He will chair the committee. The next professional will be Mr. Gregory Wilson, who has over 25 years in the oil and gas industry and is a professional subsea specialist, and he spent a great part of his career there also doing diving in oil and gas facilities, deepwater diving in oil and gas facilities. The other 2 representatives, and I've been in constant contact, I'll come to in a short while. The other 2 are representatives from BP, British Petroleum, not limited to their Trinidad operations, and Shell, again, not limited to their Trinidad operations. And the 5th and final person on the panel, I asked the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago to nominate someone, and I was quite pleased with the nomination I received whilst we were in cabinet. And that is someone everybody in the oil and gas industry will be familiar with, Mr. Eugene Tia, who has recently retired from his substantive job. So as you can see, and hopefully you will see from the outset, the government, through the Ministry of Energy, has taken a decision to ensure that this 5-panel is completely independent and staffed with top professionals in those areas. The critical ones, of course, will be the representatives from British Petroleum, BP, and Shell. I have been in conversation with both of the heads of the operations in Trinidad of BP and Shell, and this morning I had a meeting with Mr. Eugene Okper, the head of Shell in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we're asking them for is to ensure that the 2 representatives are specialists in these areas. As you would imagine, those companies, international global oil and gas companies, have set procedures, set policies for what happens in incidents, unfortunate and tragic incidents such as this. As I reminded the population on Monday, one of the most recent ones in our lifetime was in 2010 with a massive explosion on a platform in the Gulf of Mexico with British Petroleum, BP at the time. So they have the expertise in-house. I've asked them not to limit it necessarily to nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, to find the right persons who would come to the table and also have the support of their organizations, not only from a procedural point of view, but an experience in these type of investigation point of view, but also to make sure that they don't duplicate. So if it is a person from BP who has a specific skill set, then the person from Shell should not duplicate that. So between the two of them, they would be able to provide a very broad net to capture the areas that need to be looked at. Just to tell you very briefly, and it is not limited to this, but this is what the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries is asking this investigative panel to do. And by the way, they will be supported by a secretariat from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to provide them with the support that they would need in terms of secretarial services. I'm also going to put in place a lawyer to assist them should there be a need for that. And they also have, we've given them that the chairman of the committee be authorized to co-opt any additional members as required. But I would be advising them that they should really try and keep it limited to 5, and they could co-opt expertise in various areas to help the panel as opposed to co-opting into the panel. The committee will be guided, as I'll give you the scope in a short while, and they are to prepare and submit a report to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries within 45 days of receiving their appointments, and I'm aiming to have that done by next week, because I've asked BP and Shell to identify the right personnel coming out of their international operations or their local operations to represent them on this panel. What we are asking them to look at is, 1, to ascertain the scope of works issued by PARIA for the exercise. 2, to ascertain the proposed selection plan submitted by LMCS to conduct the works at the material site. That is actually for them to ascertain what was the proposed plan that was put in by LMCS for the conduct of the work, and that of course must have a safety element. What was the work plan put in by LMCS? To examine generally the policy, procedure, practices, conduct relating to its employees and organized labor for these types of maintenance exercises for PARIA and other companies likewise. To identify the precise facts and circumstances which led up to and resulted in the loss of life, and whether this was reasonable and justifiable in the particular circumstances. 5, to examine all of the decisions and actions taken after it became clear that the 5 LMCS divers went missing. 6, to investigate the nature, extent, and application of any standing orders, policy considerations, legislation, or other instructions in dealing with the situation which gave rise to this unfortunate and tragic incident. 7, to identify whether PARIA and LMCS employed sufficient safeguards and measures to ensure the safety of its contracted employees, property, and the prevention of the incident. 8, to determine the adequacy and mechanical integrity of equipment utilized by LMCS. 9, to determine the adequacy of LMCS's plans which were utilized for the operation. 10, to identify whether by act or omission any identified or unidentified party directly or indirectly caused loss of life. And 11, to examine the role played by PARIA and LMCS through its respective units, individually and collectively, in dealing with this incident. Again, I offer my sincerest condolences to the families who have had to suffer this unfortunate loss of their loved ones, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of those who supported the operations and getting and recovering the bodies of these 4 nationals of ours. There were a lot of it was a lot of collaborative effort, and in time, the report, when it is made public, I am sure will set out for all of us. As I told you all on Monday, I am certainly not prepared to get into any of the technical issues surrounding it, because I'm not versed or an expert in that, nor am I prepared to speculate or make any assumptions. So now that the families are going to be allowed the closure and the grieving, we continue to ask for God's intervention with them, and they be given strength as they go through these very difficult times. PARIA has been instructed to provide to these families the comforts and any support. I know when I was there on Saturday that they had already located an appropriate counselor and his firm to offer the support. I have been messaged throughout the ordeal by a number of interested persons and persons who are concerned about the family members that maybe this wasn't happening, but I also know the types of emotions, the trauma that was experienced, and the types of emotions that were running very high, understandably, at the time. And hopefully now that there's allowed some closure for the families, they can go through their grieving process. And I'm asking PARIA to make sure that they're provided, and LMCS, the employer of these workers, that they're provided with the necessary support as they go through these difficult times. Thank you. At this stage, we'll take some questions.
So, yeah. Right. So you set down like the aims and objectives of the committee, but I wondered if there could be something addressing. One of the sore points was men wanted to go, volunteers were rescuing to go and do some additional rescues, but they were instructed specifically by the Coast Guard. So I was trying to think if your point number 10, did any party cause any loss of life, if that could if that would include the role of a Coast Guard in, or if that the Coast Guard's role needs to be inserted as a separate point on your list.
The directions and instructions that are going to be given to the panel, this investigative committee, is basically an open sheet with the parameters of, from the time PARIA went out for a competitive tender for work to be done, those who put in their tenders, LMCS was successful. What did LMCS do? What did they provide? The work that was taking place on the 25th of February up to the point with the final retrieval of the body. It is not going to be excluding any of the activities that took place there whatsoever, but it would be wrong at this stage, as I've said, to speculate or to assume and to identify anybody or any bodies or entities other than the two that we know had the responsibility and the duty, that is LMCS and PARIA. So yes, the answer is from the time persons arrived on the scene after 2:45 p.m. on Friday, when the unfortunate initial accident took place, all the way to after midnight last night, when the final body was retrieved, the panel will be asked to look at everything inside of there, anybody who participated, etc. And as I said, I was very careful in setting out these 10 items of a scope, not to limit it. So it actually says, amongst other things.
Yes, Ms. Singh. Would the PARIA executive remain heading the organization while this investigation is going on? Because there have been calls for the removal, suspension of Newman George, Mushtaq Mohammed, and Colin Piper.
The answer is, I think it is very premature for me at this stage to take any. I do not have any report apart from the reports that were coming in to me as a minister during the period of time on when I was telling everyone, them included, and the country, let us focus on locating the bodies of these divers and get them back to their families. So the answer is, at this stage, because the media have been asking me, I haven't received any resignations, nor am I at this stage calling for any resignations. I think that would be premature. And really this panel of experts is going to go in there and look at the various roles played, and we take it from there. I certainly will take it from there. I mean, I have heard names being called even before I became fully aware, as I opened my phone last week Friday, having returned from a trip, and seeing certain names being called, and I then ended up meeting them when I was being briefed. So I would prefer, let's wait, let's see. Obviously, if an investigation is taking place and the panel at a certain stage in the investigation come with a recommendation, we believe that certain persons should step aside to allow the investigation to take place. I would give that consideration as a minister. Ms. Tiwari.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
From TV6. Now I understand that this panel investigation is underway, but I think you would agree, Minister, 45 days is a kind of really long time for a not really binding report from this panel. There are some questions which, if you can, I'd like you to answer. The health and safety...
Well, first of all, before you start to ask, let me respond to what you've just said. I don't agree that 45 days is too long a period of time, but understand 45 days is the outside date. So if the committee finishes its work within a 2-week period, I expect them to deliver the report. The idea behind the 45 days, and in speaking to the persons who have already been identified for the panel and the representatives from Shell in particular, that is recognized as being a proper space of time. And these things you'd be faced with, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I came and I said I want it within a week or 2 weeks, the answer to that would be, oh, that's too short, etc., etc. The outside period is 45 days. In speaking to Mr. Sharma last night to try and persuade him that I think he should give service and chair this committee, he was satisfied with the 45 days. So let's not prejudge that and let them do their work within the 45-day period.
The findings of the investigation wouldn't preclude you from giving us information if it's available, right?
I would not do anything to prejudice the investigation, so I'd prefer to wait the outcome of it. But again, if something arises that we, the government, believe the population should be informed about, we will do so. I think our track record says that we will always come to the population with information that the population should have.
In that case, can you see if the health and safety function at Paria is outsourced, and if so, to who?
I don't have the specifics of that.
Any idea or sense of what caused that suction to
you know, even with, I saw that, and people have been sending all of the videos and literature to me about a concept, a theory that is delta P. I don't even think we should go there as yet, because I've also received reports that it may not have been that. I think Paria is going to put out a statement that just kind of sets the record straight as to the infrastructure that existed at the time. So I'm hoping, I had hoped that they would have put that out by now. If they haven't, when they put it out, you will see that this U-shaped pipeline that I took the time to describe with the diagram, they are saying that there was no other pipeline connected to it that you could have opened and this type, but let the experts deal with that at this stage.
Avoid a similar occurrence, right? Aside from the delta P theory that people are putting forward, there are some suggestions in the public domain that some pump was turned on one.
That's what I was just referring to. So let the entities deal with that. None of us in this room, as far as I'm aware, has all of the detail as to the existing infrastructure. The answer is, in the oil and gas industry, out of many industries in the world, health and safety is a priority. I mean, sometimes I think they're very, I was going to use a word, but they are very efficient with it. For example, if any of you have to go and visit any oil and gas establishment on Point Lisas, etc., you have to watch the safety videos, you have to be briefed type of it. So let's wait for them to do the work, and that is why it is independent experts. There were all sorts of suggestions. If you use somebody from the ministry, it wouldn't be independent, etc. So we've addressed that. I want the experts to get in there as quickly as possible and to report back to us. You made a comment that is not binding. I don't know what you mean by a binding report. If the report produces there's any culpability, the recommendations to be implemented, certainly under our tenure, that will be addressed.
So, can I? Yes. So the energy pool, the energy companies, is a small, almost incestuous pool that we have running. So Paria would have worked with Shell and BP at some point in time. How are you going to guarantee that there will be independence from these two representatives?
The persons who will be chosen by these organizations would not have worked on any of this. So, for example, one of the persons I was considering recommending to Cabinet, who has a lot of expertise in the subsea and the deep sea diving on these installations and came very highly recommended. When I asked the question this morning, they said, well, he has been working with Paria in the exercise and the opera. I said, okay, well, don't even worry to send me his CV, because as far as I'm concerned, he may very well have to be a witness, so he can't operate. Yes, you may say it's incestuous. I don't think it's incestuous. It is a very big industry. So, for example, in my meeting with Shell this morning, I said, don't limit it to Trinidad and Tobago alone. And they are not the types of transactions that would take place between a BP and a Shell is really purchasing of fuel as purchasing from Heritage of the crude oil, and maybe the sale of fuel to Paria. Remember, Paria's operations are really a fuel bunkering operation since we restructured that whole Petrotrin entity. So I don't see any concern. I don't have any concern, and I don't see any reason for concern that there would be any conflict between the BP, Shell, and Paria.
Can I pick up on 2 points that my colleague here alluded to? I think my colleague was trying to allude to would there be any interim safety measures now while the long inquiry, 45 days of inquiry?
That's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't call it interim safety measures. I would certainly hope that Paria and other operators have immediately learned from this incident and have already implemented any improvements that need to take place. Understand this is this is an investigation by the regulator. This does not stop Paria and LMCS from having their own internal investigations and improvements and immediately implementing whatever they think needs to be improved. So there is absolutely no restriction on that. All of these facilities and installations have to meet a threshold of safety. Unfortunately, there are accidents that take place internationally in this sphere.
My second point, Urvashi had used the phrase, and you echoed it, non-binding. I think the question is, when we look at there was a recent report done on how well the Ministry of Health handled the COVID pandemic. And you have a kind of balancing act to do. You want to get results in quickly, whereas on the alternative, you could have the powers of a commission of inquiry, but that's the expense and it'll be a lot longer. But it has powers to actually summon people, legal power, the Commission of Inquiries Act. So the question is, just as I think the Seamungle Committee, Professor Terence Seamungle Committee would have said that certain persons would not have answered or answered promptly enough, is there any way that this committee now can ensure cooperation in whoever? Is there any way to empower
any more teeth?
Give it more teeth. Thank you.
The answer is yes. I mean, a commission of inquiry, let me just set the record straight. Appeared in quite a few commissions of inquiry. You have powers of summon. Your powers of summon do not mean that the people you have summoned have to participate and they have to cooperate. That's the first point. The reason I've very carefully recommended to Cabinet and they've accepted this be done under the regulator's authority of the Ministry of Energy is that the Ministry of Energy by law has the power to ask persons questions in this and they should answer. But it will be the same thing. I mean, a lawyer could come along and say, I'm not going to incriminate my client, etc. Let's not prejudge it. But the answer is yes, there is legal authority. So this isn't like Professor Seamungle's, just to draw a very easy distinction, the task that he was asked to, which is really a persuasive request for information. This is a regulator, that is the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. There's been an accident under the jurisdiction of the Paria facilities that fall directly within the Ministry of Energy's jurisdiction to request and to have an investigation. There's a similar OSH investigation that will take place. But on this occasion, recommended to Cabinet, let us go outside of the Ministry of Energy, but using the Ministry of Energy's powers, so you can say they're delegated to this committee to go about and do what needs to be done. And if anybody resists, I'm sure at that stage, from a legal point of view, the Ministry of Energy can write to them saying, please provide the information that's been requested, etc. And there will be consequences if they don't.
Under what act does the ministry derive its powers, would you say?
That is a good question, and I don't have the answer to that. I think it is under, I can't remember if it's under the Petroleum Act, right? There are a number of acts, but I think it might be the Petroleum Act, where the Minister of Energy is the regulator. You also have it, for example, in the licenses, the PSCs. So it may not only be a statutory thing, it can also be that the Ministry of Energy has to give a license to facilities to operate in the industry, and one of the conditions inside of there would be that that the minister would regulate you.
Could you just could you explain the reasoning or your logic behind insisting that the chairman of the committee is a lawyer?
No rocket science in that. I am a lawyer, but I think the idea behind it is that you have somebody with a legal background. So as I was discussing with Mr. Sharma last night, the idea behind it is that a lawyer, let me put it this way, a proper lawyer would know how to treat with people fairly, would know the boundaries that you can go to, would know, as I was telling him, for example, I'm taking evidence from Renuka Singh, and you make an allegation about Sean Douglas. the lawyer would then be able to guide the committee and say, well, hold on, let us now hear from Mr. Douglas and put to him what Ms. Renuka Singh said and allow Mr. Douglas's response to come into this. So it is really to give that legal guidance, because he immediately said, look, I am not an expert in this area. I said, no, you are being put, as he put it, to pull the threads together. The real reliance here is on the other 4 experts, and in particular the BP Shell, and now Mr. Eugene Tia and Mr. Wilson.
Minister, is that the reason, is the Ministry of Energy being the regulator, is that the reason that you would have gone against your initial assertions when you said that the 5-member panel would have included a permanent secretary from the Ministry of Energy?
I was waiting for that question to be asked, and thank you for the opportunity to clarify. If you go back and listen, I'm almost 100% certain, because I choose my words very carefully, I said, may be chaired. I'm thinking of it's being chaired. I didn't say definitively, because I had I had a premonition that there would be things put forward, and I also felt personally, let's not involve the Ministry of Energy staff or anybody to make any allegations and accusations that there's a closeness of relationship.
Now, some of the guidelines that you set out for this panel looked at LMCS as the subcontracted, looked at their role, their plan, and of course their safety measures. But ultimately, Minister, wouldn't you say that if an accident occurs on Carrier's compound, that they're responsible for the overarching health and safety of this compound, and they're ultimately responsible, Carrier, and by extension the state?
I am not going to give you a legal treatise on that, nor am I going to make any speculative comments on it. I guess the analogy is, for example, you want work done at your house, some construction work done at your house. You have a construction firm come to do work on your house, and they're carrying out the work, and unfortunately a wall falls. Is it that you who were not present and not having anything to do with the work are responsible? I don't think so, but again, I'm not saying that is 100% analogous here, so I'm being very careful. I don't know, nor am I attributing any blame at this stage to anyone. Let the panel do its work, and let's see what the outcome is.
There's of course this feeling by the public, and you get it when you talk to just common persons associated to the families and so on, that Carrier cordoned off the site, didn't allow anybody on the site, and that the entire site was quote-unquote mopped up, clearing it of any evidence or anything that would incriminate that company itself.
I haven't heard those allegations. The allegations don't surprise me, because I've learned how in Trinidad and Tobago people love to speculate, and as I said, there's a lot of emotion and trauma that has taken place in this short period of time. Let the investigators go and do their work. When I was thinking it through, I can see no way how certain things can be covered up, can be hidden in these instances, because it's a fact-finding exercise, will be part of it, and those things will come out if in fact they have occurred.
Minister, of course, this accident occurred just even before you all returned, you and the Prime Minister and our delegation returned from an energy summit, essentially. Is it an indictment, you feel, on the Ministry of Energy? And you, as Energy Minister, are you convinced that enough was done to, I'm choosing my words correctly, rescue those men?
Okay, I don't see the connection between the two, because there is no way that the government at that level of the cabinet, a Prime Minister and a Minister of Energy, would know exactly what piece of work is taking place anywhere throughout Trinidad and Tobago unless it's something you're directly involved in. And I don't see it as any indictment whatsoever on the Ministry of Energy. The Ministry of Energy had no role, as far as I'm aware, to play in this. This was a very unfortunate, tragic accident. And that is why we've gone this route of having an independent panel of experts. This is a very expert panel. Go in and let's find out what happened.
Finally, from me on this incident, is there any conversation about compensation for these families?
I am not getting into any conversation with respect to compensation of the families. Again, there are laws that apply. Trinidad and Tobago is a country that is governed by laws. There are a number of laws that would apply here, including the common laws, and let the families get the necessary advice, etc. And I hope that if it comes to that, that the right persons would do what is right in the circumstances. You asked about LMCS, for example. The employer was LMCS, and that's why I've continued to say LMCS and PARIA, because those are the two entities that must have had a role to play in this. So let's see how the world unfolds.
Would you be willing to entertain this incident-related questions, energy-related questions?
Go ahead.
Could you give us an update?
Could we wrap up on those questions first, so let's finish it.
Oh yeah, that's a good point missing, yeah. If there are any other questions on this?
Have you been apprised of the condition of the lone survivor, Mr. Christopher Bertram? Have you been
Apprised of his condition? No, I have not been apprised of the specific condition that his body was found in, but I hope it brings...
The survivor.
Oh, sorry, of Mr. Budram. Not within the last 24 hours. I mean, when it happened and up to the Saturday, I was aware where he was being moved to, and the arrangements that were being made to move him, because of course they had been underwater for a period of time. They had to go into a decompression chamber, and his health condition and these types of things. So I was aware.
We were expecting the Prime Minister. Is there any reason why he couldn't join us today?
You were expecting the Prime Minister. I mean, these post-cabinet press conferences, it really is a decision by the cabinet as to who should go and address. These are matters that fall directly under the remit of the Minister of Energy. This Prime Minister is certainly not a Prime Minister who has ever been apprehensive about facing the media. I mean, I can't think of another Prime Minister who's faced the media or the population more than he has. So don't let your heart be troubled or be anxious. I'm sure the Prime Minister will be addressing us very soon.
Well, I was hoping to get an update from him. He did have a meeting with Iran's president, and we were kind of wondering what were the geopolitical implications of this, because even aside from that, Minister, this war between Ukraine and Russia, we have already extended support to Ukraine, whereas our good neighbor and friend, if you would, Venezuela, has indicated their support for Russia. So persons are now curious about where we really stand and if we can be threatened.
The conference that the Prime Minister and myself attended is something called the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. It is a very limited number of countries that are part of it, and it really comes down, your membership in it came about as a result of you having significant gas reserves. 71% of the gas reserves of the world are in the initial members, of which Iran is one. Iran has significant hydrocarbon resources. I don't think there's any geopolitical question to be asked. When we were there, we had a number of requests, requests for bilateral conversations. Meeting with the president of Iran was one. I was there present in the meeting. There was absolutely nothing untoward. It was a discussion, kind of tell us about Trinidad and Tobago, where your production is, and this type of thing. And if there's any help or assistance we can give, we're prepared to do so. And there was a cordial meeting, didn't last very long, and that was the end of the meeting. The point that you just made, as well as with regard to our neighbor, from what I saw, and the acting Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Ministers here, of the UN vote yesterday, it was only 5 countries that voted in favor of this action that's being taken by Russia. I didn't see Venezuela there.
The price per barrel of oil is...
Ms. Tiwari, you're...
If I could go back to one of the topics that was discussed at post-cabinet, you brought up here with TSTT.
Glad you all remembered.
Yeah. With some of the issues that you're looking at discussing, including whether it's fit for purpose or not, the union has had several, the representative union, the communication workers, they've had several issues with asking for an investigation into the propping up of Amplia, into the operations of the board of directors, their failed 5-year projection plan. Is the union going to participate in these discussions and be part of how TSTT moves forward, whether it moves forward?
Let's start. I mean, we were just tasked with this task. So the first thing, certainly I am not very okara with TSTT, is let us start by getting in there and getting an understanding. I don't get the impression we're going to be doing a very deep dive. We're going to be looking at it, getting an idea as to what the status is, what needs to happen, making recommendations. There would be absolutely no move on our part to not have the union have an audience. I believe they may have met, or they're supposed to meet with a couple of the ministers already. So there is no issue whatsoever with us excluding the unions. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
Minister,
Okay.
on that
Yes.
point, Karen Jose for the TTT News.
I'm glad they let you ask a question.
Well, I was going to ask the TSTT question, but also you said that you'll be looking at the current market value of TSTT and if it's fit for purpose. Is the government thinking of selling TSTT or privatizing the company?
You mean privatizing the government shares in the company? That's a premature question, Karen. I think for us, we need to look at it. We need to then, that would form part of the recommendations. We need to see what is the best way forward for it and really think about what is best for the taxpayers. That's the mandate.
What is the timeline for the committee to come back to Cabinet? I don't think you give a timeline.
I didn't give a timeline because we haven't set a timeline as yet. Okay? Thank you all. Yes, Ms. Tiwari, last question.
The price per barrel of oil is over $100 US. Does the
115.
Does the government intend to absorb that increase or pass it on to consumers with the plans as it relates to liberalization of the fuel market?
So that is a matter that will be addressed in the not too distant future. It's not for today. Thank you all very much.